Good afternoon, everyone. We call this meeting of the Community Development Board to order on 1 o'clock today, November 17th. Everybody, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. This board consists of 7 members and 1 alternate who are appointed by the City Council and serve voluntarily. I am Michael Butskas, and I'll ask the other members and the staff to introduce themselves, beginning on my left.
Mary Lau.
Mike Flannery.
Brian Barker.
Jay Daniel, attorney for the board.
Nils Kushta.
Jordan Behar.
John Quattrocki.
Chris Anaskevich.
Okay. Please remember to turn off your cell phones so they do not become a distraction during the meeting. Please also refrain from having conversations in this room so that we might hear all the testimony given today. To ensure a complete record of this board's actions, we ask that each individual wishing to speak, including the applicant, speak into the microphone at the podium in front of us. Clearly state your name and spell your last name for the clerk. Now I'll ask all those in attendance today who plan to speak to please rise and be sworn in by the clerk.
Raise your right hand. Do you swear affirm the testimony you're about to give us the entire truth? I do. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Agendas of today's meeting are on the podium to your left near the entry door. Also on this podium are a roster of the Community Development Board, the list of city staff experts and their resumes, the board's rules of procedure, and the annual schedule of this board. Our first order of business is to review and approve the minutes from last month's meeting.
So there's a welcome the new board member.
Pardon me?
The agenda had to welcome the new board member.
Oh, there you go. Sorry. We do have a new board member joining us, Nils Kushta. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us.
Good afternoon. Pleasure to be here.
So, regular member or alternate member?
Alternate.
Alternate member. Very good. Welcome. What's your background?
My background is in construction. I'm a licensed building contractor, working with the general contracting company 5 years.
Excellent.
Excited to be here.
Very good. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
So continuing on, now we'll go for the approval of the minutes. Thank you, Pat, for catching me on that. Do I have a motion for approval of the minutes?
I'm sorry, who? Okay, thank you.
Do I have a second? Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries.
I can't see anyone moving their lips.
Okay. Yeah, it's kind of hard to figure out who set it behind the mask, but we'll work through that today. Next item on the agenda is citizens to be heard. Is anybody here today to speak on a matter that is not on today's agenda? There being none, we'll continue on with our regular agenda for the meeting. This board has adopted a consent agenda format, and consent items are identified as such on the agenda. Consent agenda items are those items for which the Planning and Development Department recommends approval. The applicant is in agreement with any proposed conditions, and no written objections to the case have been received to date. Items may be removed from the consent agenda today by a member of the board, a member of the staff, or any person in the audience for questions or objections. I'll read each item on the consent agenda item, and if any person wishes to remove this item from the consent agenda, please so state or raise your hand, and we remove it from the consent agenda. Items removed from the consent agenda will be heard in the regular order of the meeting. Items that remain on the consent agenda will be approved with a single vote. Our consent agenda item today is case FLD 2020-05012 and TDR 2020-07003 at 400, 405, 408, 409, 411 East Shore Drive. The owner is 411 ES. The applicant representative is John Bodziak and also Brian Ongst. And the property is located on the east and west sides of East Shore Drive. And we were reviewing the proposed 74-unit overnight accommodations use and the transfer of development rights. Does anybody want to have this item removed from the consent agenda?
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of questions. I'm not sure that they're substantive enough to remove from consent agenda, but I do have a couple of questions that I'd like to ask and get some clarification on, and if it deserves being removed, then we go at that point, but I'm not sure how you want to handle that.
I think the best way to handle that would be to technically remove it, but instead of having the staff do a full presentation on it, you can ask your questions, they can address those, and if we need to go further through the presentation, we can go from there. Does that make sense? Is that permissible?
Yeah,
Council?
your rules don't address that situation squarely. That's one way to do it, or the council member could address the questions to staff. If you're satisfied with those answers, that it doesn't warrant pulling off the consent.
Okay.
Go that way.
If we can do it that way,
It's your
then-
election, you don't have a rule that addresses it.
Okay, since we don't have a rule and that's permissible, then if you've got a couple of questions and we can have the staff representative come forward, we could address those questions, and if we need to remove it and have further inquiry, we could do so.
Kevin Number?
First question is related to parking. I see that we've got double-loaded parking that's considered valet parking, and we also have self-parking. Not sure if it's handled through the development agreement specifically, how it's handled, but my understanding or is that a mixed parking structure with both self-park and valet parking is challenging, and how is that handled in perpetuity? How is that regulated? So I'm just asking how the parking specifically is being handled in terms of management and making sure that it does work, because the only way to make that parking work is through valet.
I can give up to traffic engineering, who kind of reviewed the parking scheme, they kind of permitted it as such.
Okay.
I'm not aware that there was any issues regarding the parking through the process of review that had any conflicts with which or when the parking can or cannot function as proposed.
So mixed valet and self-park there's nothing specifically excluding that, or?
There's nothing specifically that I'm aware of that excludes it from actually kind of being part of one project.
Here, let me jump in. I'm not traffic engineering, for the record, Ellen Crandall. This project before you is for the hotel only through the HD, and originally it's to include a proposed marina. The docks weren't finalized, so they didn't come forward as part of this project, but the intent is to have also a marina facility. The hotel is allowed and able to request and have valet parking, which can be the double stacked. The marina is not, and so that's why they have this kind of overall site plan addresses the parking for both uses, even though the proposal and the details today are for the hotel only, which is why it has the mix of the parking. I don't know if that fully addresses your question, but that is why they kind of have the mix of both valet and then self-park.
If I may, I think his question was geared more towards how do we ensure that they're going to continue with the valet parking so the double stack parking actually works. So that's the nature of your question, Jordan?
Basically, yes.
Is that part of the order itself?
Condition of approval.
Condition approval, is it part of the development agreement as well, which we don't review, or? I'm just curious, because I've never seen it mixed. It's always been one or the other, and this one is distinctly mixed and also requiring a lot of use of double stack, which means there's no going back. You essentially have half your parking if for some reason it's not valet park. So
I mean, the parking and the approval is very specific to valet parking. If they wanted to come back later and change it, they would probably have to come all the way back through an FLD back before the board to alter it, because it is how it's proposed to be approved. I think if you have,
Would you like to have a specific condition on that? Just to give you comfort level that it is very clear development order.
I think it'd be fair to do something like that, yeah, and just make sure that it is insured.
Mr. Chairman, I'm going to suggest in light of this discussion, pull it off consent.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, it sounds to me like there's probably a short discussion at issue, but I would suggest removing it from consent at this point based on what I've heard.
I think so as well. I think that, especially if we're going to add a condition, that makes more sense in that respect. Okay. So then what I'll do is I'll go through the procedures for the quasi-judicial hearings, because there are no items that are up for consent today. And then we'll proceed with this case. And again, staff, the presentation can be fairly short, because now they're getting to the heart of these few questions. So all level 2 cases, such as flexible development, are considered quasi-judicial hearings. In a quasi-judicial hearing, the Community Development Board reviews the application, the staff report, correspondence, and all evidence presented today, and makes a final decision subject to appeal. This board has previously qualified all the city staff who will testify as experts in their area of professional training, education, and experience. The list of city staff experts and their resumes are in the handbook on the podium near the entry door. Any other professionals who desire to be qualified as an expert witness shall so request at the beginning of the case and present a resume to each board member. The board shall determine whether or not to qualify the person as an expert and in what field of study. At the beginning of each level 2 case, I'll ask for anyone who wishes to request party status to come forward and state your reasons. Party status may be granted if the person requesting such status demonstrates that he is a substantially affected person. The board will then determine whether or not to grant party status. Then the case will proceed as follows. Request for party status, presentation by planning and development staff, 10 minutes, presentation by applicant, 10 minutes, presentation by persons with party status, 5 minutes, cross-examination of witnesses by planning and development staff, cross-examination of witnesses by applicant, cross-examination of witnesses by persons with party status, comments by the public, 3 minutes per person, closing remarks by planning and development staff, 3 minutes, closing remarks by persons granted party status, 3 minutes, and closing remarks by applicant, 3 minutes maximum. Closing of the public hearing and discussion and vote by the board. I've already read into the record the description of today's only level 2 case. I don't believe I need to read that again. So let's go ahead and present. Is it okay to skip the presentation since we have some?
Request for party status, just to
Yeah.
clear
Does
that.
anybody in the room want to request party status in this matter? Thank you for pointing that out. Seeing none, then I think that really we can go back into the discussion we were having because of,
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. The city would ask that the board accept Mr. Norberger as an expert on the matters he's about to testify to.
okay.
So moved.
Motion made. Do I have a second?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Any discussion? All in favor say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries. Okay. Mr. Nuremberg is considered an expert in the matters. And back to the discussion, we left off, we're suggesting it might be worthwhile to have a condition of approval clearly addressing the parking question.
Yeah, and I'm not sure what that condition would be at this moment, but it's, I guess specifically that it is clear that, you know, that the valet parking remains in perpetuity as a condition of approval for all valet parking spaces. I think that would probably be the requirement. And valet parking is specific, as I'm understanding it, to the hotel, not to the marina, which is not part of this application. Is that correct, Kevin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, right now, this one is just focusing on the hotel only. They're proposing a future marina, and they've applied, or they've added, they've required, the hotel requires 89 parking spaces. They've added 100 total. Those technically will be designated for the marina in the future if they go through with that process as a level 2 approval. But right now, most of them, the valet would be for the hotel, and in the future, if they do the marina, then any standard parking space would have to be designated for that.
Okay. Anybody else have any, Brian, do you have any civil related? You're good with that?
I think that's a good question. I think it's fair condition.
Okay.
Did we ask the applicant?
Yeah, I was going to say. Applicant had gave us a thumbs up on the condition, okay? So we would add a condition related to the parking as stated by Jordan Behar.
Okay, okay, for my second question now. Second question is related to city's position on lockout units. And are they allowed? And if they are allowed, are they considered part of the primary unit, secondary to it, or are they considered their own units?
I didn't hear what the question was there.
Lockout units, yeah, units that can be identified and isolated as their own units, self-supported, stand on their own. The configuration of, I think I counted 44 units, appear to be lockout units, which would potentially bring the hotel units to 74 plus 44, which I know we don't have parking for, and just curious if the conversations come up, if it is something that's reviewed at zoning level, and...
It has not come up at all throughout the review process from HDA to current. It was just that the request is for 74 units, and that's the amount of units that they will be approved of based on the HDA, where they got 8 units and the 11 units from the TDR, as well as the 55 they're approved. So any type of additional units would kind of put them in violation of what their development approval. If it gets approved, therefore they would be subject to whatever needs to be done for them to make sure that they are only maintaining 74 units as approved by the Community Development Board. But there's been no discussion about creating any type of other type of configuration of rooms themselves other than 74 individual hotel accommodation units.
Okay. I mean, I don't know, so I bring the question up because the plans definitely appear as though they have the ability with a central interior locking door between units and the ability to isolate one bedroom, one bath units as individual hotel rooms.
I think from staff's perspective, that we're looking at the requests.
I understand.
Plans look one way, the request is one way, we look at what they're exactly asking us for. They're saying the city, based on the HDA, TDR list, they want 74 dwelling units, they allowed 55 outright. They went through a process to gain the additional units to get to 74, and that's how we reviewed it, based on the belief that they are requesting 74 accommodation units, hotel accommodation units.
Well, so with, I mean, I don't know that I'm in a position to propose a solution for that, but I don't know what we do with it, but when I look at it, it definitely appears that way, and I don't know that there's a mechanism to regulate that at a later date, and considering the parking concerns, it's just a legitimate concern on my part.
Understandable. I don't know if there's a way other than just to, I mean, the approval is for 74. If they do something above that, then I guess they're in violation of whatever their business tax receipt would be, because technically that's going to be for 74 overnight accommodation units for itself.
Mike Flannery has a follow-up question to that.
I just want to clarify your question. I think it's a great question. You're saying if you have a unit, one unit, and has a door in the middle that you can lock, and so you could essentially rent it out as 2 units.
Correct.
Does each side have a shower and everything in it?
Correct.
So what's to keep, your question is then, what's to keep them from doing that, and where are the parking spaces to go with those?
Correct.
Just want to make sure I got it right. The real problem.
Question.
Okay, so it does sound like a really good question, and I guess it's something we could also direct to the applicant and see if they can explain what their process would be for registration and limitation on the use of the rooms in that regard. Is there someone here from the applicant who's prepared to answer or address that question?
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair. Brian Ounks, 625 Court Street, McFarlane, Ferguson, and McMullen, on behalf of the applicant, 411 ES LLC. I appreciate the opportunity to address these questions. First, this is subject to a development agreement. The development agreement was unanimously approved by the City Council last year in 2019 and was unanimously amended in October to extend the time to get the site plan approval. We would have hoped to have been here before you a few months ago, but obviously with the pandemic and things going on, it took a few extra months to get here. So we appreciate the staff working with us on that and the opportunity from the council to keep this project moving forward. In terms of the quote-unquote lockout units, the total density allowed is 74 units. If they were to exceed that, they can't. They would get their CO pulled, and they would have their development agreement terminated by the city. So there is no legal right or way for them to do that. It's my understanding that it's the intent for this to be operated by a flag or some type of professional hotelier. So I would think that the risk of them risking their financing, risking all of the things that you have to do to construct a hotel on the beach to try to get around the density, I just don't see that as a viable concern, other than the fact that it's subject to the development agreement. So if it did happen, the city would be able to terminate that and shut the business down and actually take away 8 of the 74 units based on the density reserve. So you do have the ultimate protection contractually against that from happening. So it's not just left up to code enforcement. It literally could be something where the city manager and the city council terminate the development agreement, and I think the city manager would be entitled to pull the CO without even going through the code enforcement process.
Okay.
Okay.
I guess the question I would have is, would it be unreasonable as a condition of approval to remove the door that separates from the interior the one unit, what I would call the lockout unit, to the main unit?
Let me ask the architect, Mr. Bodziak. He said that's fine.
Okay.
So how would that condition generally be, Drew?
Sorry?
How would that condition generally be?
Condition would be that there would be a communicating door within the unit there cannot be a door that can lock that separates one bedroom and bath from the main unit. Probably can say that a lot more elegantly if I think about it, but essentially I'm trying to ensure that no door can be installed that creates a separate lockout unit.
Does that make sense to staff from that standpoint? Yeah, sure.
Are you suggesting that and I don't have the floor plans in front of me, that this bedroom that you're talking about also has an exterior door into a hallway?
It has a mechanism by which it can enter into a secured, so there's a doorway from the hall that leads into a hallway. And then there's a lock, or there's the potential for a locked door into both the bedroom and the main unit, the bedroom and bathroom. So essentially you could enter in through one door and have, you know, unit 74A and unit 74B with an interior potential for locking them separately from each other. So the door would be the one that, so once you enter off the hallway, you're in the unit. Which I'm happy to show the plan if anybody has further concern.
So does that, I think that way you described it, that there would be no door installed to create a separate lockout unit as between the units, I think that, to me, is clear enough from the standpoint of adding a condition for approval, if we're good with that. Okay. Good point. Do you have any other questions? No? All right. Does anybody have any other questions of either staff or the applicant? I know we're not doing it in the normal order of things, but there being nobody with party status and the way this one started, I think that we're probably good to go from there, unless there's any other public discussion. Any comments from the public on this matter? There being none, then we're going to go ahead and close public comment on it and either deliberate as a board or consider a motion. Anybody want to tackle that motion with the two conditions?
Which should be me, right?
Probably worthwhile to be you.
So I move to approve case number 1 based on the evidence and testimony presented in the application, the staff report, and at today's hearing, and hereby adopt the findings of fact and conclusions of law stated in the staff report with the conditions of approval as listed and the additional 2 conditions of the valet parking will remain in perpetuity for all of the double-loaded parking spaces. And condition 2 would be that no door can be installed within the unit that creates a additional lockout unit.
Do I have a second on that motion?
Second.
Motion made and seconded. Do we have any further discussion on this? There being none, all in favor of the motion say aye. Aye. All opposed? Motion carries unanimously with the conditions of approval as amended. All right, that takes care of that item on our agenda. Thank you all. Next, we have our director's items, which is the draft of the Fort Harrison Avenue Complete Street Concept Plan. I believe Ms. Matzke is going to present to us.
Just a second. Good afternoon, Lauren Matzke, Planning and Development. So thank you for the opportunity to speak with y'all today. I know that on the long range side, we don't get to y'all as often, but per previous requests, we do try to bring some of these larger projects to you for discussion and preview prior to going to City Council. Today I'm going to present some information on the Fort Harrison Avenue Complete Street Study. This was funded in part by a grant from Forward Pinellas as part of their concept planning money. First, I'll give a quick reminder of what complete streets are, and then recap what we've done in terms of finalizing the concepts, and I will walk through each of the segments with you. There's a lot of detail. I'll try to go quickly, but also still cover things, and you can just stop me if you need to. So I added this quote because we used it when we were presenting the Complete Streets Implementation Plan a couple years ago now for City Council approval. I think it's particularly applicable to the Fort Harrison corridor because it traverses, the Morton Plant Hospital campus. It goes through downtown and the old Clearwater Bay neighborhoods, and then it's also adjacent to our Lake Bellevue and North Greenwood neighborhoods. Complete Streets are about providing safe and comfortable travel options to people of all ages and abilities. I think there's a misconception that when you say it's a complete street, it means that it has to serve every mode of travel in every single street. But just like we don't prioritize freight travel on every single road, we don't necessarily have to prioritize spaces for people riding bikes. That being said, our streets should be safe for everyone, no matter how they choose to travel. So in 2019, I guess it was, the Complete Streets for Clearwater implementation plan was approved. That established some guiding principles for the city's program and looked citywide and identified some broader land use categories for our context, like so looking at the context of the land adjacent to the roadways and then also the classification of the roadways, whether it be an arterial road or a local street, and the concepts that are in this plan are consistent with that. I wanted to quickly show some of the different design strategies that cities use when they look to calm traffic and start to accommodate more modes than just vehicular traffic. You'll see many of these were proposed in the plan. Some of the benefit these collectively provide include slower and safer streets, aesthetic improvements, support to local businesses, and livability improvements. Before I dig into the plan, I wanted to explain a little bit of the differences between demonstration projects and permanent installations. More commonly, demonstration projects are being used because they allow cities to use less expensive materials such as paint, flex posts, and sometimes even just traffic cones to quickly install designs. It also allows the cities to test how the proposed modification works. And if it's not working, if it's not an improvement after all, then you haven't gone through the expense of engineering, design, and construction before you found that out. This particular slide shows an illustration of both a demonstration refuge island and a permanent installation, which we're probably familiar with. Refuge islands are areas that provide a place for a person crossing the street to wait safely and look both ways before crossing that second lane of travel, so it reduces that distance significantly for them. I point that out because that's one of the things that are proposed in almost all of the segments. And then quickly, this is a second variation of a demonstration project and a permanent installation, intersection bulb outs. The demonstration project also happens to achieve some of those placemaking and art goals that we like to include within our stuff these days. So many cities are just doing that, not necessarily moving into a more permanent installation. This map shows the limits of the study area, which is from Bel Air Road at the south end to North Myrtle Avenue and Alt 19 at the northern end. In total, the corridor is about 3.2 miles that was studied. Briefly, there were several other plans that have been completed in the last several years for roads that either cross or impact Fort Harrison. HDR, which was our consultant for the project, did not evaluate any of those specific plans, but I did want to highlight the main ones because they're right within the project area. This one in particular is part of an FDOT study for Alt 19. It went the length of it much further south. But in this particular space, this is where Fort Harrison turns, and you have to sit at the light at Fairmont, and they're proposing a roundabout there. Improved operations at this signal would allow the corridor, would reduce any potential delays later on through any of the other projects proposed. Additionally, many of you might be familiar with the North Marina Area Master Plan. This also preceded our Complete Streets work, but it includes some design concepts for the area of Fort Harrison in and around the Seminole Boat Ramp. So it incorporated in some of the Complete Streets ideals, such as wider sidewalks to support the businesses and on-street parking. And last, more recently, we did the Complete Drew Street project. This one mostly just crosses Fort Harrison. This is the city segment, which is, if you're looking at it, it's the view from East Avenue towards the water, and it proposes to take the 4 existing lanes and narrow it to 2 travel lanes, utilizing that extra right-of-way space between the existing curb lines to add on-street parking and then also a 2-way separated bike lane. As part of this project, we convened a visioning team, a project visioning team that was that was made up of business owners, residents, representatives from our institutions, local agencies, and city staff. This allowed us to have discussions with both the technical staff and those otherwise affected, so we all learned from each other while we were discussing those changes. We walked the corridor, we took the Jolly Trolley and hopped off at numerous places along the corridor during our first meeting, which allowed us all to experience the corridor firsthand, and then we got back together and discussed some ideas. Those led to some of our goals, and then the committee reviewed all of our proposed concepts. And last, as part of our engagement, well, not last, I guess, but also part of our engagement, we, instead of doing a full public workshop, although I realize it says public workshop, we set up a booth at Blast Friday. It's part of our goal is to start trying to get out and meet people where they're at, because the one-stop open house model doesn't necessarily bring very many people. At our booth, we were able to speak with a wide variety of attendees, increase awareness of the project, and then also encourage them to answer our online survey, which was going on at the time. And this is a word cloud. We had an interactive thing where they could text a word that described their future vision, and the more time someone said it, the larger the font got, so it added that interactiveness to it. Then we had the public input survey, and we used MetroQuest, which we've used in the past for Drew Street. This allowed us to gather more information regarding what people thought about the corridor and maybe what trade-offs they might be willing to make, and that's what's reflected generally in the image on the right. So, it was like, is Fort Harrison to be used to drive through downtown or drive to downtown? Are you looking for, speed versus safety and other things? All right, now to the heart of it all. So in conjunction or in partnership with the project visioning team, we established goals for each segment, and these are of course included in the plan. And I'm going to walk through each segment one at a time, and these will kind of be repeated. So for each one, I'll show you a picture like this of the existing characteristics of each segment. This is the southern segment, which was further divided out into two because the character kind of changes a little bit about halfway through. This is from Bel Air Road to Bellevue Boulevard. In this area, there's 4 lanes. It's undivided, so there's no left turn lane for cars to use to get out of the way. I'll provide a variety of images for each segment, which were all, of course, in your report. The icons that you see here are used to signify the type of design strategy that's used in a specific location. For example, this symbol, that circle there, shows where refuge islands are proposed, in this instance at Wildwood Way, just south of Bel Air Road. And then as another example, the little paintbrush is used to show where a painted intersection could be used as part of placemaking and identity. So this shows two different section drawings, the existing situation and the proposed with the road diet. HDR reviewed or analyzed the ability to reconfigure the existing travel lanes to go from 4 lanes to 3, utilizing that 3rd lane as a turn lane, a left turn lane. And it also, the proposed concept also then utilizes some of that extra space to add landscaped islands along the east side of the road. Keeping costs in mind, you'll see that it maintains the existing curb and gutter there, but that's to provide additional buffer to the existing sidewalks and elsewhere further up the road where the Pinellas Trail hits. Since this was a road diet, there was some additional traffic analysis completed, and the analysis showed that the level of service would decrease during the peak hour only, and that would be from a level of service C to a level of service D. And based on the average daily traffic counts that was completed for this, the peak hour travel was between 4 and 5 p.m. So during that 1 hour of a day, you would anticipate some delay. Additionally, during that same hour, they studied what it would do to the intersection at Bellevue. And currently there's about a 3-second delay in 2020 for that during the PM peak hour, and that is projected to increase to about 7 seconds by 2040. 2040 was the study, and they assumed an increase of 1% of trips every year to 2040 as part of their analysis. A detailed analysis was not completed for the rest of the corridor where other landscape medians and other things are provided, but HDR's engineering team has said they don't think that it would be any substantial delays for that either. Since there was a road diet proposed for this particular segment, there's additional more detailed concepts provided, so that's what's shown now on your screen. Again, it'll convert the 4-lane road to 2 lanes, and I want to emphasize it's really intermittent left turn lanes, or left turn lanes with intermittent landscaped islands, as opposed to proposing landscape islands through the duration of it with only little bits to turn. And that allows us to use the islands to create that friction and slow traffic a little bit, so there's not as much speeding. I'm not going to go into any other detail on this particular slide because I've already covered it on the other 2 versions. Moving north, segment 1B extends from Bellevue Boulevard to Chestnut Street. This is really the transition as you're getting closer to downtown. It serves the Morton Plant Hospital campus. There's Lakeview, which is at the southern portion, or kind of in the middle there between Bellevue and Chestnut. Lakeview Road, which connects Fort Harrison to Alt 19, which serves as kind of they call it a bypass of downtown, but it does go through downtown, so it's just an alternate way to get to downtown. As a project team, we discussed that particular intersection a lot because people don't really seem to use the bypass, and that was one of our tasks. Like, could we somehow reconfigure the Lakeview intersection or do something to help kind of get more traffic to take that versus Fort Harrison, where there's, tends to be some backup in and around the Court Chestnut pair. But there's limited existing right-of-way, so there's not enough right-of-way to accommodate a solution like a roundabout, which was what we discussed. So that's why you don't see something further there. But in the plan, we talk very briefly about, some wayfinding signage or other options may still be available to try to get traffic there. In this particular area, there's already 3 lanes of traffic, so the road diet doesn't need to continue up. There's a lot of mature trees, as you know, especially in and around the Morton Plant campus. So those already create a different environment than what we're trying to deal with north and south of it. So because the segment is already 3 lanes, the concept proposes really pretty minor changes, I would say. I think the sections are best to use to illustrate what those changes are. Landscape islands, again, replacing, in one area you'll see on the top picture, there's the 3 lanes plus in some areas there's an unbuffered narrow bike lane. It's only about 4 feet. When we were out walking, it really doesn't get much use. People tend to stay on the trail or use the sidewalks to connect to the trail. So by shifting around what's between the curbs, you could replace those narrow on-street bike lanes to add landscaping, and that would allow you, in this instance, you would need to move the curb, but you could widen the sidewalks that kind of connect through and around the trails and still maintain that buffer from the travel lanes. That was one of the recommendations from the PVT that was integrated in. And then additionally, it's proposed to add 2 different refuge islands like that previous picture. One at Lakeview Road, so directly on Lakeview Road, not on Fort Harrison, where the Pinellas Trail crosses. And then also north of Pine Street, there's an existing crossing, adding a refuge and then an RRFB, one of the blinky lights. And that would be at the crossing that's near the museum. So there's the existing crossing, and that would make that just that much nicer for people crossing from the museum to the retail and restaurants on the other side. I'd like to highlight again, since this is an area where Morton Plant, obviously they have different demands and users, and we have to accommodate ambulances and other things. Since they participated as part of the project visioning team, we were very much aware of any of their concerns related to how changing this continuous left turn lane into something more intermittent might affect them. We would really work with them in terms of locating future landscape islands and confirming that future refuge islands wouldn't necessarily conflict. That's why it's important that it's not continuous, because even if you have just a small spot, you can still move ahead, and ambulances could use that turn lane if they needed to pass it. So that dialogue would be ongoing through future phases. This is the detailed concept because this kind of finishes up that corridor, but this only captures, it's not for the whole segment. This captures just there to the Lakeview Road section. So it shows where the widened trail section would be, where it parallels Fort Harrison, and then also where that refuge island would be on Lakeview. About halfway through the segments. So segment 2, now we're officially into 2, extends from Chestnut Street to Drew Street, and this is really in the downtown core of our downtown planning area. A significant portion of these properties are associated with the Church of Scientology. They're on the Fort Harrison Avenue line. Cleveland Street intersection is obviously a key retail corner for the city. There's a high level of pedestrian activity in this segment. You may know if you've ever tried to walk it, we experienced this as a team. The sidewalks are very narrow in some locations. There are tripping hazards like high curbs and signage obstructions and other things that make the sidewalk a little less usable in places. The goals for this segment were to use the streetscape to create a welcoming, livable, and economically vibrant downtown, improve the public space, and also potentially address some parking and loading access areas, and provide opportunities for landscaping and beautification. In this particular area, we're proposing to add refuge islands at the existing Park and Franklin Streets crossings, where there are already RRFBs, again, the blinky lights, installed, so just adding those. And that would be possible only if the lanes are reconfigured. And so there's a couple of things here that I'd like to point out. There's 2 alternatives within this plan that propose removing the left turn lane in a couple of sections. So this section drawing shows Fort Harrison looking north from Cleveland Street. On the west side is the narrow sidewalk that currently exists. There's no on-street parking on this side, only on the east side. So eliminating the left turn lane would free up some of the public right-of-way to reconfigure the curb, and that would allow the sidewalks there on the west side to be widened, and as well as to add parking to support businesses. That parking could also potentially be used for a parklet, like a small, using one parking space for some seating or outdoor dining space or anything like that. Again, if there's restaurants or something, they have just constrained sidewalks even with some widening. So it frees up some opportunities there, and we all hear about the need for parking in downtown. This is another example where we could test out a change prior to moving into engineering and design. We've talked about just throwing up some orange cones, closing the intersection, and making sure we test and actually see what happens. The second left turn lane elimination is shown in this area. HDR proposed it to eliminate the northbound left turn lane at Pierce Street. This is the area in front of the Fort Harrison Hotel, where currently deliveries primarily take place in that center turn lane, and the pedestrian drop-off takes place more or less on the sidewalk. The vehicles have to drive up and encroach on the sidewalk if you've ever tried to walk in front of it. So with this design, there would be 2 through lanes, but that center turn lane would be removed. The new zone would allow for freight and delivery to be moved to the side instead of in the middle of the street. And it would also then allow for that sidewalk to be a full width sidewalk again. The Church of Scientology was also a member of our project visioning team. And if you saw on the plan, they provided some additional renderings of what this could look like. They were supportive of the idea. Our last segment is from Drew Street to North Myrtle Avenue. This is as you're moving north out of downtown, although the first half of it probably is within downtown. The portion between Eldridge Street and Cedar Street was included within the North Marina Area Master Plan, so some of those designs overlap with this but aren't necessarily drawn in these concepts. North of Cedar Street, the adjacent context changes primarily to single-family residential as it carries on up, although there's the brewery and a few other businesses up there. Brewery was part of our PVT as well. The sidewalks in this area, they're in relatively poor condition. They're not necessarily too narrow, but our PVT members commented when walking in this area that there wasn't enough buffer, and so it really didn't make for a comfortable walk. And additionally, there was a lack of shade. In this area, the proposed changes focus on beautifying the streetscape and attracting investment and development to achieve that future land use vision from downtown and up. Narrowing the lanes for traffic calming, because in certain areas, people do go pretty fast, it's nice and straight, and providing opportunities for landscaping and beautification. So starting at the southern end there between Drew and Eldridge, there's not a lot that needs to be done, but you could evaluate where adding some of those intermittent median islands would be possible, where there's a continuous left turn lane, but it doesn't turn to anything. So there's opportunity to repurpose some of that space. The main proposal for this segment is to utilize chicaning to slow traffic back down to the posted speed limit. Adding mid-block bulb outs while maintaining the existing curve creates this chicaning movement to encourage drivers to not speed. It also allows for that landscaping to be added to create larger buffers to the existing sidewalk, which should improve pedestrian comfort while they're walking. It also creates opportunities for some additional on-street parking. And last, tucked in at the very end of the report, we always like to include a high-level analysis of what it could cost to do this. This report assumes limited changes to the curb lines except in those areas that I pointed out. And it also includes some milling and restriping to accomplish a lot of what was proposed. That being said, the city has planned a future utility construction project along Fort Harrison Avenue that will actually require a full reconstruction of the majority of the corridor in the span of about 4 or 5 years. So that project would be done in phases. And this was a great opportunity. This shows that if we have the plans in place and a city project comes forward like a utility project, when they have to rebuild, we can rebuild how we want it to be. And that saves costs in the long run. So it's not that $4 million would be added to their project, but if there wasn't another project, this is approximately what it would cost. But again, many of the things that you saw here have the ability to be done in that demonstration or quick build approach prior to the larger reconstruction project. So if for some reason that got delayed or we didn't have budget for this, we would like to look for those opportunities to see and test and get things going. So with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Does anybody have any questions?
Yes, sir.
I have, did I miss the roundabout up at the corner? But that's fine. Did I see the roundabout on there?
I can go back to it. The one at the very top?
Yeah.
The
It doesn't
FDOT
matter.
one?
I just wanted to, that's fine. That's a good place to have a roundabout, I think.
No, it's like super
Bit
small.
of a stupid light.
Oh, could help if.
I just sort of asking to make sure I didn't, yeah, that one right
There
there.
you go.
Yeah, okay, I had 2 questions. One of them is sort of dumb, but along the road right now, there's some cones and some blue markings up there in that area.
Yes.
And I travel through, somebody next to me says, why are those there? And so why don't I find out?
That was our first foray into a demonstration project. Planning and Development worked with the community up there several years ago now, kind of following the momentum from the North Marina Area Master Plan. That plan called for adding on-street parking and narrowing the roads, and so that was our first opportunity to reconfigure a portion of it. I think we'd hoped to do a larger stretch, so unfortunately, it's kind of limited where it is. I don't remember, obviously, the exact data from the time, but we did use the opportunity to measure traffic counts and speeds before and after the event. And we did see that speeds came down with that. So I don't know if it sustained as people got more used to it, but something like that could be done for the whole stretch, and I think that would be a more effective use, but that was our first attempt. And it was a lot of fun painting with everyone. I don't know if you remember, but initially we had planter boxes out there as well, and the kids had painted the planter boxes at the North Greenwood Center, and we installed them with the community, and it was just a lot of fun. And we have that crosswalk. Sorry.
Okay, I think that answers that one.
Uh-huh.
I can go home today and explain. I did have one surprise though. I thought that the intersection of Bellevue and Fort Harrison with the trail crossing would be a perfect place to have a scramble. scramble being you shut down everything and all the lights are off and everybody walks any way they want. And I was just surprised that that wasn't, if it was considered, could they take a look at that one location? Because right now you have this light, that light, that light, that light, that light, and scramble seems to work quite well. In fact, I think I got it from the city of it, for one of their things they sent to me.
We do have one scramble out there, and I'm trying to remember exactly where I thought it was where the trail crosses, but of course I'm drawing a blank right now. So I don't know. They have the diagonal paint, and it's worked really well, and I believe that is how it functions. But I know that
Yeah, the diagonal goes every which way, and everybody can walk this way and that way, and all the lights are off. Anyway, if you would ask them just to it came up from here maybe. See if they would reconsider that in particular, the scramble, because I've seen it. I think it
and that was, I apologize, Bellevue?
Bellevue at where the trail crosses, where the Pellis Kill crosses, yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, anyway, thank you.
Any other questions?
So,
Go ahead.
go ahead.
Great presentation. And I really like the study. One thing that came to mind, I'm seeing a lot of municipalities do, and I think Pinellas is looking at doing this in North Pinellas as well, is not only incorporating landscape strips, but incorporating stormwater areas and rain gardens within those strips.
Yes.
And in a lot of situations, it makes a lot of sense where you have, on the side where you have a crown, so you can make bulb outs and install stormwater planters and different flow-through planters that allow infiltration in Florida-friendly plantings. Did you look at possibly incorporating that as well?
We did not, because our goal was to not have to move curb lines and do major reconstruction. But we also had the benefit of knowing that there was a utilities project in the future. And with that project, we've already had those discussions. I believe that they're doing something like that as part of the third phase of the Cleveland Street project. That'll be our first area to do a separated bike lane and with more of the rain garden techniques. I might be misspeaking though, so I don't think engineering is still here to be able to answer that. But yes, as part of a more robust program, if we had the support and the budget, that would be something that would absolutely make sense. But in those concepts, there were, we kind of maintained and separated, so we didn't have to move stormwater.
Yeah.
But
I understand, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's many situations and there's so many different types of facilities that you can actually do some retrofits where you have flow-through planters, so you're not doing a lot of grade changes, but you can still generate a concept that still acts like a rain garden, allows infiltration for a lower expense. So, it seems like there's options out there, so it'd be great if that could be explored. The other thing I was wondering about is you talked about striping bulb outs and creating temporary conditions. Have you thought about maybe using some artists to do something artistic in those areas? Has that been explored? I've seen some larger cities do that as well.
have you seen Tampa's? They just did one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we've not had very specific conversations about that, but I would imagine that would be something that we would consider, certainly with the partnership with our public art. We just did our first painted intersection in the city over the weekend. So with the neighborhoods program and our placemaking and public art really moving forward, that would definitely be a good opportunity to go beyond polka dots.
Yeah.
Even though I love polka dots.
Right. Great, thank you.
Ryan, you had a comment?
Yeah, in reducing the number of lanes from like 4 to 2, generally speaking, have they looked at increasing the lane widths that are left? Because the concern I have, all the people going to Seminole Boat Ramp pulling boats, and then you're adding islands, which are obstacles.
So as it relates to the boat traffic, I know that, again, so there's kind of this lays into a certain degree, but the North Marina Area Master Plan, when we refine things and go into full construction drawings, will kind of merge those two. And when we were doing the streetscape aspects of the North Marina Area Master Plan, we specifically left 12-foot lanes for several blocks there to accommodate the boat traffic and made sure that the left turn lane was maintained in that particular, at the Seminole intersection.
Good.
So typically I believe that The rule of thumb now is about 11 feet when calming traffic. That supports a bus width, but in that particular area, because of the boat traffic, I think we would evaluate those widths.
Yeah, because you're gonna have people veering around the chicanes and landscape
Yes.
islands.
Yes.
You're running right over it.
And fortunately, it's a very popular place to
Yep,
be.
a lot of traffic, yep.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Question on the, when was the traffic analysis done that supports reducing 4 lanes to sort of 3 lanes to 2 lanes on the south section of Fort Harrison? Because I'm just surprised with the amount of traffic that goes through there, that going down to 2 lanes is really a good long-term solution. So I'm curious about when that was done.
I did not print my appendix, and so the only page that I printed doesn't have it, but I want to say it was done we were working on the project in January, February timeframe. I can say that the average daily traffic in that area is about 19,000 cars, which is right in line with the kind of good candidates for a road diet.
And then, and specifically, I wanted to make sure it certainly didn't happen during COVID.
No.
So that would be good. And then the other thing is heading north, coming up to the Chestnut Court Street intersections is on a regular basis backed up, significantly at that location. I didn't see anything specific, unless I missed it, trying to address improving the flow through that area. Because everybody's looking for outlets, they're running through the strip malls, they're going around, down Turner Street and up the side roads, and I mean, that seems like a real problem area.
So I'm not a traffic engineer, and I know that signal timing is very difficult to finesse. That particular area is where east-west travel has the right of way, so at a certain point, there's just not much you can do unless you shifted the signals there. Part of that is why we were having those early conversations about how could we potentially get some traffic to shift on to Lakeview as opposed to using Fort Harrison as a through street. But anecdotally, I drive Fort Harrison even though I know I'm going to stop at that same place every time because I find it to be a nicer drive than Myrtle Avenue. Myrtle Avenue is very green and leafy, but there's nothing to look at. So, a congestion problem isn't necessarily always a bad thing to have, but I do know, like, when you start getting people who get frustrated, it starts to create an unpleasant environment as well.
And it just seems as you're reimagining these streets that would be a logical component to incorporate. I mean,
That really is the pinch point, but unless the city wants to change their signalizations, I think that's really the only, it's not, there's no ability to create more lanes in that particular area either, so. But it's definitely something we've talked about, like, is there anything?
And then, the funding for this comes, I know that it's not happening now and it may be in conjunction with others, but the funding source for Complete Streets is it a special tax? Is it?
Well, we applied for a grant from Forward Pinellas several years ago when they wanted to start seeing cities be able to do the planning for Complete Streets and some of the concept designs. They created a grant program, and every year they allocate $100,000 to applicants. They have also created a construction grant program, and that would be you apply for up to $1 million 5 years out. This would be a project that would likely be a contender if we chose to apply for that. But we got that same grant program funding for the concept drawings for Drew Street. That was their first year, and then took a year off and then went back. And so I think they've just finished their approving cycle 4 or 5 now.
Is there any discussions on specific areas where they would definitely benefit the owners directly adjacent, like private-public funding, any kind of joint partnership in that, or any private dollars being added to it? Is that an option or a thought?
To the
Just in areas that are specific to, that are really geared to help specifically, like in front of like the Fort Harrison, for example. I mean, that's a terrible situation there. And it's, there's definitely dollars involved in that and improving that, but it really benefits Fort Harrison Hotel more than anything. I mean, is there any opportunity for private participation in the funding sources?
We've not had that conversation because to date, we were looking at, just what could it cost at this conceptual level, and then knowing that the utility project was coming through kind of shifted the way we were looking at this particular corridor.
And I'm just curious because it may accelerate the process or provide some additional funding or advance the level of improvements, perhaps. Just throwing it out there.
I just want to make sure that it's clear that our goal is to incorporate these complete street projects on the back of other city utility projects so that we can have funding for them through our enterprise fund, water, sewer,
Gotcha.
and gas, has projects. So long term, we're looking at a major utility project along this corridor. And so our goal is to incorporate these concepts in that project and have additional costs have to come out of the project.
Thanks.
Anything, Mike?
Okay, 3 more comments. And it was a good report, by the way, thank you. One of them has to do with trying to drive down there, how often you have 4 lanes where you can actually pass somebody. Because as it is right now, if you come down Alderton 19 and stay along at the Fort Harrison route, you follow somebody that goes 23.5 miles an hour with some out-of-state tag, all the way down from Tarpon Springs to Largo. And I can remember going north, there's a place to pass, but south, they just hold you up forever. At least, can they see if there's a place available where you can have 4 lanes, where you can go around the person that's going real slow? Otherwise, you've been down for 25 minutes on that road. That's just a thought.
Well, I imagine you've experienced where someone has illegally used the continuous left turn lane to pass cars, and that's a little terrifying.
Yes.
It happened to me just a few weeks ago, so.
And I'd prefer to have a spot where I could know I could pass instead of having to do, I haven't done that. But.
Much of this has right-of-way width that would not support, a third travel lane, in addition to the continuous turn lane. So that's why we're looking at really how can you repurpose this turn lane that, especially through downtown, turns to nothing because there's no curb cuts, which is exactly what we want in downtown. But I do understand your point.
It's just that I can't remember any 2 lanes very often, 4 lanes in much of that stretch anyway, so I'm not losing much.
Yeah, the only 4-lane stretch really is at the southern end, and it eventually moves into 3 right within Clearwater, so that's where we're proposing really extending that 3-lane further down.
My second thought is that the traffic study should have been a dual one with Myrtle and Fort Harrison at the same time. Maybe it was, maybe it wasn't. But right now, there's 2 reasons to take Fort Harrison. This is prettier. But also, it's miserable, the lights on Myrtle are real bad. So we know the special shortcut. And we go around through that little neighborhood and we cut across here. Instead of wait 10 minutes at that light that never changes because it's all priority for Fort Harrison. And I would think a traffic study should be both the parallel roads, Alderton 19, Myrtle, and Fort Harrison combined, because otherwise, well, why is this happening? It's like it has no connection. And they are connected. People choose one or the other because of how long it takes to drive on Myrtle versus just sitting there and plugging up, especially through the Scientology and then the Publix area. So anyway, I thought I'd throw that in to make sure that HDR has looked at them in parallel, what they can do to make Myrtle faster, to take some load off of, so maybe they have, maybe I just didn't see that.
Well, so a portion of Myrtle is city, and then the rest of it turns into Alt 19, and of course the state studied that in detail as part of their Alt 19 study. And I don't know if this will scare you or not, but in terms of the Alt 19 portion, they were looking at additional traffic calming and other things. So while HDR's scope was really limited just to analyzing that very southern section where a road diet was proposed, there was certainly knowledge of some of these other changes. Additionally, I know FDOT has requested Forward Pinellas, the transportation agency, to start working with the local communities to evaluate or dig more into their proposed concepts for Alt 19. So I imagine these conversations will be going on concurrently, because as you're correct, it's not appropriate, and it's difficult to talk about one, to only consider one without looking at the other. You know, good transportation planning evaluates it as a network. It really is a network. So it's not a goal to shift, you know, solely or displace all of that. But HDR's analysis shows that, you know, again, that one intersection from 3 seconds to 7 seconds. And, you know, safety wasn't the same, you know, safety wasn't a concern along Fort Harrison as it was when we were evaluating Drew Street. The impetus just wasn't the same. But at the same time, you know, in those areas where there is a lot of pedestrian traffic, you know, just getting the cars to go the speed limit. I mean, I know it's frustrating when you're stuck behind someone not going the speed limit because they're going slower, but if you can get them to go the speed limit through our downtown areas, that's safer for everyone. You know, if a car hits another car, it's safer.
A couple more real quickly. I was on the Drew Street one and design. It was quite interesting. But I was surprised as we did Drew Street. And we said, what other streets could we do? Nobody mentioned Sunset Point. And it's been closed for a year and a half. You can't drive from Sunset Point from North Fort Harrison to Keene. They've had this intersection, and then that one. And that is ludicrous a nice term to use? Or I know it's a state road, but and I'm thinking back on North Fort Harrison, it seems like, I've been a traffic engineer enough to know what goes on, utility engineer to understand how they fit together. And it seems like they didn't. They said, let's get this one done, and then we'll do the next one, and then we'll do the next one, and then we'll, if they're gonna do the same thing on North Fort Harrison, we might as well just, another year and a half of being shut down. Can I send a report back to the traffic department here, at least work with the state, and ask them if they could coordinate the utilities with the other stuff so we're not shut down another road? Back to where I was. Drew Street was supposed to be a major road. And we said, well, we can take the traffic off of Sunset Point Road. But it's been shut down for a year and a half. So all the traffic studies and everything don't really count because everybody's been going on Drew Street. So anyway, could they see if they could coordinate a little bit better if they have to do something on North Fort Harrison? This coordination was not really well done.
So Sunset, that is all county projects. You know, I assume that their engineering and our engineering coordinated, and unfortunately I know that they did because we've managed to fit in some utilities work at the same time while the roads are already dug up. But I do know that has taken a long time. I do not know why. As it relates to Fort Harrison and any of that particular road, you know, it's all city roads, so all of the city utilities, stormwater, and everything, you know, it's all managed by us. But as I said, it's anticipated to be a multi-phase project, not necessarily aligning with our segments that we broke it out based on context. So
I appreciate you.
So they would be doing, you know, from what I understand it would be, you know, a year of design for the first phase, move into construction, start, you know, somewhere along the way, start designing the second phase and just kind of roll through it. But it'd be several years of work.
I stand corrected, county versus city road. No, I had to click with me.
I think that it's always good to remind us to coordinate. I think that all the jurisdictions are getting better at it, and all the city departments are getting better at it, because we certainly aren't perfect, and there's a long history of it not necessarily working the way we'd like it to. we've just started having coordination meetings with the county and Forward Pinellas, both engineering and planning. We had the first of what will be many going forward, and I think those dialogues, as we all work together, will really help shape some of those projects where they're multi-jurisdictional, and we can hopefully advance more as a collective than as individuals.
Last one, I'm sorry to bother you. Last one is the landings, and I never looked at the final site plan on the landings. And I know it didn't pass, so it gives us more time to do something. Whatever. My point was not the landings, but that's the place to put it. We identified there's very few east-west roads in Clearwater, especially north of Drew Street. It's a real problem. That's why I put so much load on Drew and Drewwood and all those. And a road going through the landing should be considered by our city department. So while that golf course isn't there, if we can take a road through there, it might be useful to look at anyway as a master plan. Just suggesting as a master planning issue. Thank you very much.
Sure. Great time to say. It's the department has kicked off its update to the comprehensive plan. So there will be times where we're coming in front of you to discuss many things. We're going into data analysis phase, then we'll be moving into visioning our scope of work. We're working with HDR again, so it's part HDR and part city staff, and we'll be bringing updates to you throughout that process, but also, hopefully as citizens, you'll join us in many of our outreach opportunities and help get the word out to people, because this is our chance. Every 10 to 12 years we get to do an update, and this one's going to be more substantial and really modernize everything, I think. So
Thank you very much for the presentation. It was very informative, very well put together. I think everybody got a lot of information out of it, and we look forward to additional presentations. Anybody have any other questions? Very good. Anything else from the director? No? All right. Then I think we're adjourned for today. Thank you.